Good morning. Who is happy to be here? It all feels normal, right? The place is great. The organization is fantastic. The food is very nice. Technic, Technical equipment works fantastically. The one thing I'm missing is big round of applause for the organizers. Thank you so much to the organizing team. It's always a great pleasure to be here. This is actually my 10th talk, according to the adaptTo archive, if you count the folding bike lightning talk contest. So, which was not really a talk, but which was fun. So the question not tomorrow, the question this morning is where to render. We've been discussing this, and I was one of the original committers of Apache Sling, and Sling was very much oriented towards server-side rendering. Some people were complaining at the time. You know, already 10 years ago, they were saying, "Oh, this feels like the web from 1998." And so I'm more of a back-end guy. But since about a year now, I've been focusing more on the web platform. I will explain what I mean by that. And this has brought me more, I've always been doing that. I've always been considering both the back end and the front end, because in the end, it's the overall thing that counts for your users. But I'm clearly not a CSS guru, for example. I can do it if I'm forced to do it, but that's it. So my name is Bertrand. I come from the French-speaking part of Switzerland. I work for Adobe, attached to the Basel office as a principal scientist in the sites team, so the team who works on experience manager websites mostly. I'm also active in open source, so I was active in the Apache Software Foundation since the early 2000s, on the board of directors for 12 years or something now, and it's very it's very interesting to see these two worlds, the corporate world and the open source world. I will start by being a bit provocative. This is not the web. This is one of the early tutorials. If you're interested in React, I have nothing against React. It's a great framework when you need it, and I don't think you need React to create a header with a button. And I think some people have been wrongly led into believing that if you do a website, you need a JavaScript framework because it's complicated. A header with a button is not complicated and should not be. And I think it's very important that we realize the simplicity of the web at its heart. I started doing web. My first serious web project was in 1998. Maybe some of you were not born at that time. And for the Swiss government, and there were not many options. We had to do very simple HTML. Because HTML was simple. HTTP 0.9 was fantastically simple. Open a socket, get one line, send the content back, you're done. And it was all very simple. And it doesn't have to be much more complicated. I will show some examples where you need more complexity because you have interactive stuff. But in many cases, when you want to show a page, the basics are very simple. I think it's important to remember that. So no offense against the JavaScript frameworks. Many of them are great when you need them. And it's important to think seriously, do I need this or not? So what do I mean by the web platform? It's not me. It's the industry has been putting more importance on the web platform. The web platform has always been with us. In 1998, we already had HTTP, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, more or less. And it hasn't changed, but it has immensely progressed in the last 10 years, maybe I would say. One thing that's not shown here, but is very important, is the concept of the evergreen browsers. So basically, the browsers today, you can expect the browsers to be updated, and that's a huge progress, which it wasn't, 8 years ago, it was a big problem. Can we assume that the client browser is up to date? Today, in many cases, it's safe to assume that. And it means that we can take advantage of the specs as they are today. And they are, for example, HTML has improved a lot in the last 5 to 8 years with new elements which are more semantic, allow you to express your markup much better. CSS has made huge progress. As I was saying, I don't do much CSS, and I did a bit more this year, and I was looking at it, wow, that's great. I wish we had that 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And JavaScript has also become better. And I think it's very important to keep that in mind and be aware of that and what it allows us to do. My go-to reference for that is MDN, Mozilla Developers Network, which is very actively developed and documents. People say it's the user manual of the web, basically. So that's always my starting point if I want to learn more. I wrote a blog post about that on our developer blog about a year ago called "The Web Platform is Back" that you can read if you want to understand better this, our view about that. So the topic is rendering. So rendering, generating content that you need to display your page or pages to the user, which means generating HTML, maybe CSS, maybe JavaScript, and combining them together in a meaningful way. I have here a diagram of a typical rendering pipeline. And I put full options because, it's, if you need, I'm taking the New York Times website as an example here, which is a pretty big, pretty complex website. If you need to generate such a website with personalization, dynamic parts in the content, you might need all of this. If you do a simpler website, maybe you need just a few of these elements. But let's discuss what they are, and then we'll see when you need what. So the top rectangle is origin to cache. So you have your origin where your content starts. Typically, some form of database might just be files in a folder, but you could argue that it's also a kind of database. And from this, you're going to generate content that's suitable for the client browser. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I put here, the box says semantic HTML. We'll explain in the next slide what it means more precisely. Meaning you should not generate any HTML. You should think about the structure of your HTML. It's very important. There are many ways to shape your HTML that look the same on the browser, but they look very different inside, and that's very important. Having good semantic HTML will help you will help search engines make sense of what you're doing. It will help assistive technologies, screen readers and stuff, understand better what your content is. It will help developers, because when they look at the HTML, they understand better what it does. At the beginnings of the web, what we were doing is looking at the source code of the web pages. When I started doing web, I said, oh, how are they doing that? You look at the source code, HTML, some CSS, it's easy to understand. Nowadays, it has sometimes become a bit more complicated to understand what's going on. And again, it should not be. So if your HTML is well structured and semantic, it has tons of advantages. And then the output of this first box gets into a cache. Nowadays, I would say you always need a cache. You don't want to serve directly from the origin to your clients. If you're in a bursty, I used to work for before joining Day Software and Adobe, I was independent. I was working for Swiss Television for their websites, and we had extremely bursty traffic. It's Switzerland. It's a French-speaking part of Switzerland, so it's a pretty small area, like 2 million people. But then you have bursts. So the website is very quiet, and then you have the news on TV, and something happens, and boom, you have a burst by 10, 100, 1,000 times traffic. So without a cache, you would be dead. I think it's pretty obvious today that you need a good cache in your publishing chain. And then the bottom boxes are more optional. If you have good HTML, CSS in a cache, that can be enough for a website that doesn't have many dynamics. And then you might need more dynamics. And let's start by the rightmost box, the client-side part. You can, of course, do rendering on the client side. If you have CSS, the browser is anyway rendering the HTML, so there is always some rendering happening. But you can also influence that by CSS styles, which, as we said, has become extremely powerful. So it's really worth learning that seriously nowadays. And you can also have some JavaScript to render, like we saw in the edge delivery examples. You can have tiny bits of JavaScript to tweak, fine-tune your content. You could also completely render in JavaScript. We'll see an example where that makes sense. So there are options here. And then the left box at the bottom here is what happens at the edge. And this is fairly new. Since a few years, it's easy to get services in your CDN, so where your cache runs. You can also run some code. Cloudflare has the Cloudflare workers. Fastly has compute at edge, and other CDN providers have their own variants of that. Basically, you run JavaScript code at the edge with APIs which are not yet standardized. So if you do Cloudflare Worker, it's a bit different from a Fastly compute at edge. So you might have to write your own abstraction layer if you want to use the same code. It's not much. It's a few API calls that you need to follow. So this is still evolving in terms of cost, in terms of what you can do. I did some prototyping, for example, on Cloudflare, where you were limited to 500 milliseconds of execution time. And after that, your script is killed. So if you're on the edge of that, it's a bit funky. So this is something that's still pretty new, that's still evolving, but offers fantastic possibilities when you need, to run code close to your client. So with a low latency between that code and the client. We'll see that in one of the next slides. So this is the overall typical rendering pipeline. It's not, it's not exactly what we have in our products or whatever. I'm looking at here more of at a high level, what are the components that you need. And then the stars, the yellow stars are the rendering code that you need, absolutely. You need to generate HTML. Maybe you're starting with HTML files, so it's a function that does nothing. But in general, you need to render your HTML. And then the blue stars are things that are optional, as I mentioned. So you don't always need to run code at the edge, and you don't always need to run code on the client. It depends on your application. And again, it's good to think about that. What do we mean by semantic HTML? So this is an example from MDN, Mozilla Developers Network, where the top example is very semantic. This is a H1, top-level header of the document. It's obvious what that means in terms of document semantics. And the bottom one might look the same on your browser. If you do a span and you style it like a header, from the client side, maybe you don't see any difference. But from when you read the HTML or when a machine reads the HTML, it means nothing. That's a span. That's some text, whatever. So this is a very good example of the differences. In practice, it's much more subtle and complicated. But what I mean is that it's good to maybe reread the HTML spec if you haven't read it in the last 2-3 years, because there's new things which are super useful. Read this documentation, you have the link here, on MDN about the semantics, what they mean, and then when you do your project, think about, is my HTML really nice in a semantic way? And there's different levels, so someone might be calling this of semantic HTML, okay, it's not, it could be better, there's different levels, but it's at least good to have the intention to do it and see what you can do. Let's dig a bit deeper into this first part of the pipeline, the origin to cache. I have 2 lines here, on the left, for stable-ish content and very stable content. And if you have a large website, you very often have these differences. If you have a website of, I don't know, if I'm selling musical instruments and I have a big website, some pages will change very rarely. The about page of my company or the team page, if it's a small team, it doesn't change often. So these pages might stay unchanged for a month. And other pages might be changing regularly, but not every second. Like maybe you have your weekly news page. Okay, it changes once a week. It's very quick to generate and stuff. So what I mean here is that in some cases, it can be useful to make a difference and say, okay, for the very stable content, we might even pre-generate the HTML. There's many tools which allow you to generate, to pre-generate your stuff, and then you have HTML pages. It's super simple. You can serve directly from them with just a cache in between. Can be super efficient. And then for the for the stable-ish content that changes maybe once a week or once a day, having a simple server-side generation might be very, very useful. So that's a distinction that you can make in some cases. It's not, it's not often, but I think it's good to keep that in the back of our minds, because in some websites, for example, if you're doing a government information website, maybe 98% of the content is super stable. Then you could pre-generate, and maybe there's just a tiny part of the website that's actually dynamic. So it's good to think about this. It can make your life much simpler. When I did this first web project in 1998, it was for the Swiss Parliament, parliament.ch, so the main website of the Swiss Parliament, and it was under attack all the time. For the hackers, I hacked the Swiss Parliament, that sounds so good. So we were under attack all the time. It was mostly static at the time, or stable-ish, so pages changing like once a day. So what we did, we completely regenerated the website every day at midnight. So midnight, you got a fresh website every day. So I'm not saying if, I'm saying when we got hacked, then we knew it couldn't last more than a few hours. So that's a pragmatic solution to something that was at the time, 25 years ago, a bit hard to manage. Let's look in a bit more detail about the cache to web page section, and this is where we might have more discussions. I think the other part is pretty, mainstream today. We know how to do it, and this is, as I was saying, especially the edge stuff is fairly new, and it's we have to ask, do we really need this? Because it's a bit more complicated, it's a bit less standard, the pricing is still evolving maybe in your CDN provider, the limitations are also evolving, so this is a bit more bleeding edge, I would say. It's a good, the edge is bleeding edge, that's a good one. So why we want to do that? The main benefit of that is the low latency. This code, the code that you run at the edge, runs very close to your client. Fastly, someone was telling me the other day, I think they have about order of magnitude 200 access points on the globe. So you're very likely to be close to one, even if you're in Australia, in Singapore, in Iceland, in Greenland, or I don't know where. So that's the benefit of running that code here. It's that it runs really close to your client. It's not on the client. So even if the client is a poor old phone with crappy CPU and stuff, doesn't matter. You can run code in an efficient environment, but it's very close to your client in terms of latency. This can be super useful for personalization. If you want to personalize a page, that's a great place to run that code. If you have very dynamic data, I don't know if you have a stock data that you want to update very regularly, every second or even more than that, it can be very good. And this was also mentioned in another talk, with HTTP 2 and 3, the number of requests that the browser makes to this endpoint doesn't matter. It is efficient. Even if you have 10 requests in parallel, it's not a problem. It used to be a problem, because every request with HTTP 1, every request needs to establish a TCP connection, which is expensive, especially in a mobile network. And today this is gone if you can run HTTP 2 or 3 between browser and access point. So this is a fantastic place to run client that runs close to your, to run code that runs close to your client in terms of latency. But again, it's still a bit, it's not as stable in terms of environment, pricing limitations than the other stuff. And then you have the client-side rendering. What some of the JavaScript frameworks will try to lead you to believe that you always need this. There's no way to do a website without a JavaScript framework. This is very wrong. But in some cases you need it. In many cases, actually, many websites have some form of dynamics, a search box or a shopping cart or things like that where you need dynamics. And then it's totally fine and good to run the JavaScript on the client to do the rendering. Or like in the case of the edge delivery, where we decided to have a pipeline that spits out fixed HTML, then you need some JavaScript on the client to do the final rendering tweaks. And then you have the CSS styles. I think it's pretty obvious today that it's totally fine to use CSS. But I would go one step further. I would say it's totally fine to keep learning and improving your CSS skills for people who are writing the actual CSS. because it has evolved immensely in the last few years. And today you can do a carousel, an image carousel, just with CSS, for example, which is fantastic. Even if you don't get JavaScript, that works. There's a fun web page called Everybody Has JavaScript, right? I don't know if you've seen it. It's a flow chart, and it says, yes, in theory, everybody has JavaScript. If you're on a train and you get the HTML right before entering the tunnel, JavaScript might never come. Okay, I don't have JavaScript. Sometimes firewalls are doing weird things. If you're in an airport, some airport firewalls have been known to inject ads in your JavaScript, which can break lots of things. So in theory today, it's safe to assume that everybody has JavaScript. In practice, might not always be the case. So it might be good to think about that. Do I really need JavaScript, or what happens to a website if you don't have JavaScript? It depends on your industry. It depends on your expected audience. So again, you need to think about that. So the message here is Edge and client-side JavaScript are optional and should be used sparingly. They offer fantastic possibilities, but you have to think hard about whether you actually need this or not. So to summarize what I'm trying to say here, it's the web. So the web starts with HTML, and that's what you should do. You should really focus on getting good HTML that's as semantic as possible for your application. And then the next step is to use modern CSS, not just the CSS of my time, which was quite basic, but what you can do today with CSS, which is extremely powerful. And think before writing JavaScript. Again, do I really need this? And then the second section here is about degrading gracefully. If you're on a train, the top picture is what we as software developers see. We have an environment where we have 3 screens and a powerful computer and a high bandwidth connection, and it's all very fast, doesn't matter. And then you're on your phone. I have a waterproof phone. I do a lot of cycling, so I have a waterproof phone because I was getting tired of my phones being broken. And it's kind of an oldish, electronics inside. It's not very powerful. So when I'm on my phone on a train, it can be painful, and you should think about that. How does my website look on a crappy phone, on a train, in a tunnel? For some pages of your website, you don't care, because this page needs interaction anyway, so it doesn't matter. Other pages might be good to have a degraded mode, which still makes sense. If you're on a boat, I also do sailing, so when you're offshore, connections can be extremely hard. So I'm very grateful for example, weather websites that have a useful degraded mode. If you're on a boat like that, it's very useful. So again, we should think about this degradation. What happens when we step out of our very nice software developer environment to real life things that can real life environments and situations that can happen. So going back to the typical pipeline schema diagram, here I have stars with more colors to express where I think the rendering should happen, because this was the question of this talk, so I have to answer it. I don't have all the answers, but I have pointers of how to answer in your environment. So the yellow stars are, yes, of course you need that. You need to generate HTML. It might be good to differentiate between stable-ish and very stable content. If you have a big website, can make your life easier. And you should generate semantic HTML, semantic enough for your use case, for your application, and it's a good goal to have. So stay up to date with the HTML specs, stay up to date with what the browsers support, and keep expanding your knowledge of that. And this is for the origin to cache section. Then the green star is for what you certainly want. I think any website wants CSS today. It's very rare that you don't need it, and it's totally fine to use it. And as I said, use modern CSS, study it, keep up to date with the new things. Be careful with the red star, the JavaScript. Think, do I need this JavaScript? Do I really need this framework? Do I really need to ship 48 kilobytes or 4,000 megabytes? Not that, but do I really need to ship this framework code to my client just for one little box on my website? Can I do this in a simpler way? getting closer to the web platform, no, vanilla JS stuff. It's good to think about that. And then one thing that I did not mention so far, but can be very useful, the orange star, the web components. Web components are also a web platform standard. They are not too popular at the moment. If you look at articles on the web, they don't seem to be getting much traction. But if you go to websites of large companies, there's lots of web components. If you go to the Red Hat website, their design system is web components. If you go to GitHub, there's tons of web components on the pages. Adobe has the Spectrum Web Components project, which is used, for example, for Photoshop Web. So they are getting more and more traction, and I think they will be an important important element of what we do going forward. So I don't have much time here to go more in this, but if you grab me around here, I'm still here today, I'd be very happy to talk with you about web components. A few examples in 4 minutes, so it will be quick. So I was looking at the New York Times website as an example of a large website, which is somewhat complex, but has lots of content. And interestingly, if you disable JavaScript on the website, you see that some images show up and some images are just placeholders. It shows a good thing that they are using placeholders. It's great to avoid, layout shifts when your website is being built. On the other hand, first I thought, oh, that's a dynamic loading of images, very cool. And then I looked at it, and it might not be on purpose. If you look, I think the images that show up are IMG, and the ones that don't show up are picture. And so there might be something wrong here. But the idea of placeholders I found very interesting. If you look at the HTML of the New York Times, it's reasonably semantic. It's pretty good. They are using, for example, article element with headers and p, things like that. So I think it's a pretty good example of modern rendering. Without JavaScript, the site is still usable. There's some fun things, but it's usable. Another one is the blog.adobe.com, which is generated with Edge Delivery, which was presented multiple times in this conference. And this one, if you turn off JavaScript, you see nothing. That's a trick to avoid, blinking when it's being rendered with JavaScript. For this case, for a technical blog, I think it's safe to assume, okay, you require JavaScript. It's not a problem today. And interestingly, it might even be more performant than generating the whole thing in HTML. Because with JavaScript, with the early, lazy, delayed phases that were explained in a few talks, you can do less work in the early phase. So it can also allow you to actually optimize the rendering. So I'm not saying JavaScript is wrong. I'm saying you should use it in a sane way. The other one, I will not have time to demonstrate it, but chiptune.app, that's a very fun website where you can play MIDI files which sound like game console chips. And this one, obviously, without JavaScript, it makes no sense. It's totally interactive. It's browsing files. It's playing MIDI files. So for a site like that, it's totally fine to say, well, I use a JavaScript framework maybe because it makes my life easier. So again, choosing what makes sense based on your environment. GitHub, as I was saying, if you go to a GIST page, it has 29 web components. That's a lot. So it's an interesting way to see how GitHub is using that. They also have a few blog posts on why and how they use web components. This would be the topic for another talk, I guess. But that's something that's on my mind a lot these days in this web platform context. So we're getting to the Coda. So I've been saying, I've been repeating the same things a few times, but that's so my message gets through. I think what's the most important thing, if you remember just one thing from my talk, is that you have to make conscious decisions about where your rendering happen. Think about it. Does this bit need to be rendered as HTML? Do I really need JavaScript on the client? Can I make the best use of CSS to render this nicely? And that's what you should, that should be part of your development reasoning. HTML first, CSS next, JavaScript if you need it. I think that's my rule nowadays. And again, one size does not fit all. I don't like being religious about such thing. I could say, yeah, you have to render it completely in HTML, no JavaScript. That's not right. You have to be intelligent and think about how you want to go about it. And that's it. So I hope this has been useful. I'll be here the whole day. If you want to chat, I'm happy to. And if you get me started on the web components, we might have a good conversation. Thank you.
Merci, Bertrand. And thank you for reminding us to the simplicity. I think that is very important.
Yeah, that's a very important topic for me.
So Henry would like to know, would you also say that every web page has to be usable without JavaScript?
No. Again, it depends on your target audience, and it depends on the role of that web page in your website. It's personally, I prefer, and if I was a public service, for example, that's probably a requirement that I would set. But it's not possible I mean, it has a cost. So you have to decide, is the cost worth it, basically?
Bert would like to know, who should take the lead? Should the process of best practices be defined by the backend or the front-end developer?
If you're speaking about backend and front-end teams, you're already lost. It should be... it should be one team doing a website, and then you have some back-end specialists, you have some front-end specialists. That's my answer.
Shakir is curious, is it not a lot of work to mix up rendering strategies for different parts of the application?
It can be a lot of work, yes, definitely. If you want to implement the complete pipeline, as I'm showing here, that's a lot of work. On the other hand, many of us are working on big, complex websites or families of websites where it makes total sense to do that. For my personal blog, I don't do that. I just use a blog generator and I'm done. So again, it depends on the environment and the complexity of the project.
And the next anonymous question, I'm sure it's from a front-end developer. When would you use something like Vue.js?
For the interactive part, for the really interactive part of your website, if you have one page that's that's a cost calculator or an insurance simulation thing, whatever, it's totally fine. Use the best JavaScript framework that you can find for that. But for this one page, and do not burden the whole site with that, for the page that are just static content. That would be my answer.
Thank you, Bertrand. It was great to have you on stage.
Thanks.